drumming started with jazz. Learning jazz is the foundation of drumming. There's no such thing as something being difficult. It's a matter of it being familiar or unfamiliar. You have to exude confidence. You have to exude the ability of saying, I am here for a reason and I'm gonna embody that.
Nice work, man.
Thank you, man.
To all of you out there watching, please welcome Ulysses Owens Jr. to
Glad
Drumeo.
to be here, man.
Dude, it's great to have you here, and we've been talking about this for a long time, so
yes.
I'm glad you're finally sitting here with this like awesome set of drums too. I think we were talking earlier, you have the smallest bass drum I think we've ever had in the studio.
I won the award for smallest kit, jazz kit, but I was telling you, man, I mean, that's what we do as jazz drummers. We have small kits, you know, and 16-inch bass drum and all that, so I'm excited.
It's awesome. So to any of you who aren't familiar with Ulysses, you've done a lot in your career, and
I'm fortunate.
You are the small ensemble director at Juilliard in New York. You've done that for 7 years.
Yes.
That's a crazy position. Like, you hear the drummers that come out of that program, and it's the highest level, basically.
I'm grateful, man.
You've been doing that. You've worked with, to name a few, Christian McBride, plus his big band, Joey Alexander, Wynton Marsalis, Kurt Elling, Gregory Porter, John Beasley, and the list goes on. You also have your own groups, the Generation Y Quintet and the Ulysses Owens Jr. Big Band, which you've been voted the Rising All-Star Big Band in Downbeat magazine. So lots of really cool stuff. So if you want to go check out Ulysses, you're active on social media all the time, posting stuff of what you're up to. All the links are in the description to his social media channels as well as his website. Lastly, we do this kind of thing inside of Drumeo all the time. I think this month we've we've had tons of different drummers. We had some country stuff last week. We had some rock stuff the week earlier. Ulysses is here. We're doing a whole lesson on how to play jazz, which is awesome. So if you want to check out everything that we're up to over on Drumeo, there's a link right below, drumeo.com/trial, and you can get a free 7 days and see all of the other stuff that we have inside the members area, methods for learning how to play the drums, song transcriptions, and some really cool stuff coming in the new year that was part of the reason you came up here.
Yeah, man.
There's some really cool stuff coming in January 2024 that I'm stoked about, and Ulysses has done a bunch of the jazz segments for us. So it's going to be a lot of fun, but let's get right into the lesson. Talking about how to play jazz on the drums. And from all the years I've seen, or all the years we've been putting out content on Drumeo, it seems like there's a lot of drummers, at least now, they're starting with rock playing. And I feel like a lot of drummers, even if they don't know how to get into jazz, they have this sense of feeling like they need to learn how to play it. And I believe it's going to make, even if you don't end up being a jazz drummer, it'll change the way you play the drums entirely.
Absolutely.
So take it away. Where do we start if you're brand new to playing jazz? And
Sure. Well, I want to just echo what you just stated about learning how to play jazz. To me is integral to learning how to play the drums. Not to go off on a deep diatribe, but if you look at early drum history, especially like early 1900s, late 1800s, drumming started with jazz, right? If you want to go back to folks like Baby Dodds, Warren Baby Dodds, and a lot of the innovators of this music, it began with that. So it's not just so much learning jazz helps you to kind of understand drums. Learning jazz is the foundation of drumming. So I think it's really key. So with that said, I'm going to kind of start with the ride cymbal. And what I'm referencing is really like that bebop era, like the 1940s, because between like the early 1900s and 1940s, you had the swing era, big band, you had a lot of really incredible drummers to play, but it was really the mid to late 1940s when the ride cymbal pattern got introduced, and that's sort of what we acknowledge as jazz today. One of the key drummers who I want to speak his name, and I've been talking about him all day, and that's the great Kenny Clark. Kenny Clark, also known as Klook, created that pattern, and what I will say before I play it is that he didn't necessarily create the Spangling pattern, as I was taught by Kenny Washington, the jazz maniac, who was taught by Eddie Locke and Papa Joe. It wasn't that he created the pattern, but what he did was he took it from the hi-hat to the ride cymbal. So I'm going to play a little bit of just the evolution of that pattern, like very, very, very quickly. So basically you have guys like Warren Baby Dodds who started out playing like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. And they went to the hi-hat. Kenny Clark came along and did this. So that's where I'm starting with the jazz ride cymbal. That basically was like the evolution of about 20 to 30 years of drum history. But to our audience, if you want to really learn how to play the ride cymbal, we're going to start first with some quarter notes. So basically, I'll use the same tempo. 1, 2, quarter notes. Here we go. You want to get that going really nice and easy. Then you want to get the hi-hat on 2 and 4. And then you want to play what I call the jazz pattern, which is Spangling. And one last key to it is feathering on the bass drum on all fours, actually feathering, not playing too loud. And then lastly, with a little snare comping in there. So all together it's like this. And that groove is really important because pretty much most of what you're gonna play. And when I say jazz, like traditional jazz, whether you're playing at a cafe or you're playing in your high school big band or college big band or whatever, that is the foundation. So if you know how to do that, that is kind of the baseline of playing jazz drums, like the grooves. Obviously, jazz is varied, so it has many different grooves, but that's kind of the basic thing. And I would say, kind of in closing to this section, the ride cymbal has to be like the entree. It's what you have to make sound good. Mulgrew Miller, my great mentor, used to always say to me, if you make that cymbal dance and make people feel good, your phone will never stop ringing.
Yeah.
So it begins with that, and then everything else, hi-hat, bass drum, all that kind of supports it. And so that's kind of, the jazz ride cymbal, jazz swing beat summed up in a very quick way.
Yeah. And to anyone out there who maybe is coming from the rock world and they've only played rock drums, I think you talking about the ride cymbal being the foundation.
Yes.
Coming from rock, I guess that would be the kick and snare,
absolutely,
the backbeat, and
yes,
the four on the floor or whatever. But also, like, a big thing for me that was kind of eye-opening was when you look back, even at the rock drummers who we all look up to, John Bonham, Neil Peart, even Steve Gadd, when they were growing up playing drums, that's what they were playing. They came from that music, and I think often we forget that swing was like a foundation of a lot of those drummers playing.
Yeah, I just had a live, I have a show that I do every Thursday on my Instagram channel, and I had John Riley, who we both know and love. Shout out to John. And we talked about Steve Gadd in his early days, and I think his Rochester, but he talked about, there's a great Mangione, Chuck Mangione record called Alive. And it's a very young Steve Gadd, who he said at the time, I think when Steve, I guess, was in college or whatever, all he listened to was Roy Haynes.
Okay.
And so if you actually listen to that record, you can hear, like I checked it out a couple of days ago, you literally hear like the early kind of emergence of Steve's concept. Like, I mean, even when he did backbeats, like you could say, okay, that's Steve.
Yeah.
But a lot of his vocabulary was very jazzy. Like he had the touch. And I think when you learn how to play jazz drum set, there's a deeper understanding to the mechanics of the drums that I think when you get into other things, styles like funk or whatever, sometimes you strip everything down and you just play a groove, versus with jazz, you're tapping into the sound of each instrument, on the drum set. You're understanding, what does the ride do? What does the hi-hat do? How can I dig into the sound? How do I pull sound out of the drums? It's much more of a deeper, I think, technical relationship with each drum versus whether you're playing reggae or whatever. You kind of have to dismiss these individual drums and say, how do I bring them together to make this thing happen?
Yeah. So talking about the swing beat, in your experience teaching this stuff, what are some of the most common problems that you come across when you hear new drummers learning this or coming into a lesson and it not sounding right or not feeling right? Like, what are some of the common issues that you see?
So, excuse me, the first thing I'll say that is problematic is most young drummers do not listen to swing. So the reason why I can do this is because I've listened to Kenny Clark do this. And actually Kenny Clark, specifically on one of the records I love, and I mentioned this record, Miles Davis's Walkin'. Kenny has actually a straighter cymbal beat. If I talk about Philly Joe has more of a snappier swung beat. And I could go on and on and on. What's my man, Jimmy Cobb, Kinda Blue with Miles Davis, has more of a ride cymbal, quarter note beat, right? So because I've listened to all these drummers, I can tell you what their approaches are. Most of these young drummers, they just hear maybe me, or they go to a workshop, or they go to a gig, and they're like, how can I get better? And I'm like, well, how much are you listening?
Yeah.
And one of the things too that I want to make sure that we, if I can get the word out there, is we are kind of living in a generation that listens to tracks and not albums. If you want to really dig into this music, you have to get whole albums, because listening to how Philly Joe plays at the beginning of Blue Train, and then, by the end of it, of the record, or Elvin at the beginning of Love Supreme versus the end of Love Supreme, there's this evolution, right? Which is probably similar to John Bonham or other great rock drummers. But oftentimes, we don't like to listen to things that we're unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
A teacher told me years ago, actually, when I was at Juilliard, he said, there's no such thing as something being difficult. It's a matter of it being familiar or unfamiliar. So what I will say to young drummers, get familiar with listening, because if you listen, it gets into the ear, and then you will, by virtue of just osmosis, you will start to imitate what's in the ear. So that's the big thing. And then lastly, you got to spend the time.
Yeah.
Well, you and I talked about this earlier, which is, I used to literally, and I'm not exaggerating for Drumeo, though I'm excited to be here, I used to literally be in a practice room at Juilliard when I was a student there, and I'd have a ride cymbal, and I'd just be watching TV like this, and I'd just be doing this. Just, making sure I'm playing the sweet spot, making sure I'm, because some of it is just muscle conditioning.
Yeah.
So those are a few things I think young drummers have to tap into: listening, getting the stuff in the ear, and then just conditioning the limbs to play these patterns and play this music.
Yeah. I remember even for me being in college and getting into jazz for the first time. And at the beginning, I didn't really pick out some of those things. And then as you keep listening, I remember Power to the People with Jack DeJohnette. And I remember hearing some of his more like angular ride cymbal playing and some of the things that he would do repeatedly from track to track.
Yep.
And it's almost like you have these light bulb moments when you listen to it over and over again, and then you start to pick out those nuances.
Yeah.
And like you said, like there's no shortcut to doing that. It's just repetition.
Yeah, which is why it's not smart to just say, oh, like I'll say to a student, the student will come get a lesson from me, and they'll enjoy it, and they'll say, okay, so what should I listen to? And I say, listen to it please more than once.
Yeah.
Because they'll come back after the lesson, and I'm like, so how was it? And they're like, it was great. And I'm like, how many times did you listen to it? Whoa, about 3 times. Man, versus you and I could just call records, and I know you're probably like, man, 3 or 4 times. That's how many times I listened to it in one day.
I know.
Right? So then when you bring up a certain tune and we start singing along to it, or we start scatting along to it, it's because of that level of intimacy that we've gotten with the record from just listening to it.
When you can sing the piano part, or you know those little things like, oh, he's doing this or whatever. But
absolutely.
It's I'm sure you see it all the time, but it's almost like a lost art form.
Yeah, and I just think in general, and I don't want to be like that guy, like, this generation, I will just say we have to become deeply interested in the things that we want to know, which is what I love about Drumeo, is you guys' job. You put all this great information out there, and you make sure that we have access to it and at unlimited amounts of time, and it's great, and these kind of things lives. However, when all of this stuff is done, when you turn the computer off, you've still got to be deeply interested, and that interest will then turn into you practicing, which will then form into a greater level of excellence and ability to play this music at a high level. But you can't shortcut.
Yeah, if you have the passion for it, it's
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes everything so much easier.
Absolutely.
But the time is the time for sure.
Absolutely.
I want to get to the next track. So the first track you did was called "Don't Blame Me."
Yes.
A song by Ahmad Jamal.
Yes.
And this one is, we both don't know the name of it, but I'm sure someone out there on YouTube
please help us.
On Drumeo will know the name of this standard. It's another one by Ahmad Jamal.
Yeah, and I just want to say quickly, so Kenny Washington, who I studied with for many years, he's now a colleague of mine at Juilliard. He made this CD of drummerless recordings for me.
Oh, nice.
To learn how to not only play along with them, but to orchestrate. And so these songs come from that, but he did not put any names. This is like old school. He's like, I'll burn your CD.
It's track 4.
So this is track 2.
Okay. I love it. All right, here it is. Awesome, man. I was waiting for someone to write in the chat what it was, and the only one I saw, Thad's Pad by Hank Jones.
You know what? That could be possible. Okay.
I'm not familiar with it, but
yeah, because on that CD there's a lot of Ahmad, Jamal, and some Hank Jones stuff on there. So yeah, that might be it. I've been waiting on a wonderful jazz drummer and colleague of mine, Aaron Kimmel. I've been waiting on him because Aaron knows everything.
Okay, that's awesome. Let's get into the next section here. I want to talk about some brush playing.
Great.
I mean, you've written a whole book on it, and just watching you play brushes over the last few days is like unreal.
Oh man.
So this is probably one of the harder things for people to get into when they start approaching or start getting into playing jazz on the drums. So where should someone start when it comes to playing brushes?
Sure. So there's a record that absolutely changed my life as far as brush playing. And I think if you listen to that record, it will change your life and it will inspire you to play brushes. It's an Ahmad Jamal record. It's in the jazz world, it's very famous. It's called Live at the Pershing.
Yes.
It was recorded live in Chicago. And one of the great drummers who is very unsung, his name is, was Vernell Fournier. He's a New Orleans Creole drummer. And I think listening to that record will allow you to hear what the sound of the drums should be. Cool thing about Vernell, from what I understand, he actually played, his brushes were like this.
Oh, really?
So they're so you hear that big brush sound and they actually were like this. But Vernell was really great. And so when I heard the sound of him, that's what inspired me to play. But I'll kind of give you all just a very quick crash course in brush playing. One of the things that's very important with brush playing is to know it is not separate from what you do with the swing beat with sticks. It's very much the same. But we'll start with the left hand. Basically, the left hand is what the hi-hat would do when you're playing with sticks. So I'll choose a tempo about right here. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's important whether Evans, Remo, whatever the drum head is, I'm using it as a point of reference at the logo. You want your 2 and 4 to be there. So I call this 12 o'clock. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I take my hand off the drum, it's very much like I always like to say try to model after ballet dancers. So you want like 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're using the forearm to get around the drum, and then the wrist just kind of brings it around, right? So we start there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's without an accent. Now we're gonna add an accent in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're gonna take the same thing that we do on the ride cymbal with the right stick, and we're just gonna add that with the brush in the center of the drum. 1, 2, 3, 4. Play it one more time. Now I'm gonna add the hi-hat, heel down. And it's important. I know some of you are probably like, why are his snares off? When I was taking lessons with Kenny Washington, one of the things that he had admonished me to do was to play with the snares off so you could really hear the sound of the drum and also the sound of the drum head. And that was told to him by Papa Joe Jones.
Okay.
So if Papa Joe said it, it's good enough for me.
That's the rule then.
That's the rule, right? What I will also say, sometimes when I want to get a little bit of a crisper sound, or if I want to play, especially if I'm playing with singers and kind of get that classic jazz sound, I will turn the snares on, do the same thing. But it's much harder to make the brushes sound good with the snares off, which is why I spend a lot of time practicing. But that was kind of a basic foundation in playing brushes. I will just very quickly demonstrate ballad playing, which is, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's kind of the same thing, but again, to learn more about that, they got to check out the lesson.
Yeah, that's right. I think one probably common issue I would expect is when you're playing the jazz ride with the right hand and you're sweeping underneath.
Yes.
Do you see a lot of students almost getting caught?
Oh, it's train wreck all day.
Okay.
I mean, so I see this all the time, But the key is making sure, like, I actually don't move this hand a lot. The right hand, and it stays in the center, and then you kind of get that left hand out of the way really quickly. But there's a little bit of give and take. But again, that's why you have to really spend time with your own playing to know, like, how do I navigate my own challenges?
Yeah.
Another thing that's really key, a couple other challenges are, I love playing these ProMark brushes. It's not just me plugging ProMark, but these are thinner brushes. No matter what brand that you use, when you have these big wide brushes, they're gonna get in the way and you're gonna have a lot of collision on the drum head. So I think if whatever brand you like to play, make sure that the fan can be adjusted or retractable to a smaller fan so that they don't get in the way.
Yeah.
Also be weary of getting too far outside of the playing area, because then the brushes start getting snagged on the rim.
Then you gotta go bring your pair of pliers to class with you and cut the edges.
Yes. Another thing too, I just want to say before we move on, make sure you are using, like, I love Evans G1 coated. If you're a Remo person, coated Ambassador, Aquarian, the vintage, or whatever their basic head is. Make sure you have a good drum head, because if not, you won't hear it. So if you're using even things like the Power Dot, any kind of head that has a certain level of treatment that gets in the way of a smooth surface, it will make it very difficult for you to have a good brush sound.
Yeah. And speaking of just tuning, I know this is a common question.
Yes.
Obviously, everyone has their own sound, their own preference. For this kit here, like, are you typically tuning the bottom heads higher or lower or even with the top head?
Man, that's a great question. So I would say it's more around even, but like even earlier when we started yesterday, I had the top head at a certain pitch and it wasn't settling.
Yeah.
And I find if a head is on the sharper side, so it has a higher pitch, I want to get it flatter, or, to the center of the pitch, I will lower the bottom drum head to get that pitch down. Same thing, if it's too flat, I will sometimes raise the bottom head. So it's funny, Herlin Riley and I used to talk a lot about tuning, and he always says, get the top head where you want it, and then start messing with the bottom head to kind of get whatever the top head like tone into the center of the pitch. So with that said, I guess if it's even, cool. Now, when I first started playing jazz, I was really trying to get what's called bebop tuning, which is where the drums almost sound kind of like a timbale.
Exactly.
Which I love, like guys like Joe Farnsworth and Kenny Washington. I mean, they have it matched perfectly. I have not been able to do that well, but I love, like, if a kit's already tuned that way, I love it, because I feel like when you hop on a kit that has bebop tuning, it immediately just like, you just sound like jazz.
Yeah.
But, I play a lot of different gigs, even in the context of jazz. So I need my drums to kind of stay wide open so I can have more flexibility.
Awesome. Let's jump into, do you want to talk about some of the counterclockwise?
Sure, we want to. Yeah.
And so, what are the advantages to that versus clockwise?
So I won't say there's an advantage. What I will say, there's sound options. So your clockwise, which is what I showed you earlier, here, counterclockwise is the exact opposite. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. That's with no accent. Now with an accent. With hi-hat. Now we're gonna add the right stick. Right brush. I prefer playing it clockwise. So I would say the advantages are one is more comfortable than the other for some people. Like Kenny Washington, he plays counterclockwise, and that is his sound. I find when I'm playing more of a 2-feel, and 2-feel is where the bass kind of breaks up the time, like boom, 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 ba-doom, boom, 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 ba-doom, boom, boom, boom. I like to play counterclockwise.
Okay.
Because that for me, it just makes it feel good. It's like 1, 2, boom. It just adds a vibe.
Yeah.
But then everything else pretty much I use clockwise.
Was it, correct me if I'm wrong, but did Elvin play counterclockwise brushes?
So
That's what
there
I've
have
heard,
been videos I've seen where it's kind of like, like that. Yeah. I mean, the brushes are so interesting to me. And when I wrote the book, that was one of the hardest things because everybody's different, right? Like I kind of broke it down to like you have more of the staccato approach like this. Then you got guys like my favorite, like Jeff Hamilton, which is more of like a sweepy kind of thing. Same Clayton Cameron. And then like you talk about Elvin, you got Nussbaum. There's so many different interpretations of how you can play. My advice to people is start with kind of this basic way and then learn all the other ones if you can.
Yeah, and I guess too, as you spend more time with this, there's going to be motions that come more naturally to you and others that feel really awkward and you might want to adjust, but it's such a personal thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I still don't feel 100% playing counterclockwise. Even like certain tempos, I feel good, but when it gets to those faster tempos, I just am immediately more comfortable clockwise.
Yeah.
And then there are friends of mine that play counterclockwise. They do not feel comfortable playing clockwise. It's also something we should mention very quickly, the match grip brush players.
Yes.
And I actually posted, about this earlier, guys like Bill Stewart or whatever. I think when you study, you get the sound. If getting to that sound is a different way than everybody else, there's something to be celebrated about that. But I think make sure you know what the sound is. And when I hear a guy like Bill Stewart, I hear the tradition in his playing. He's not sacrificing anything playing match grip.
Yeah.
So some people sometimes, the challenge is they want to take what's easy, but then they're very different from the sound. And one of the things that I love is when you listen to Lewis Nash or any of the new drum, Eric Harlan, Gilmore, whatever, you can trace their sound back to the masters.
Yeah.
So if you're like, well, that's too difficult, and I'm just going to do what I want, and it's very different than what we hear on the record, then you need to adjust. Because our goal, at least for me, is I want to get as close to what the masters did as possible. That's my life's journey and pursuit.
Yeah. And how cool is it that, people like Kenny are a direct lineage to people like Papa Joe Jones.
Oh man, I freaked out when he said that one day.
That's insane.
Literally I was in his apartment and we were playing. He was like, because everybody knows Kenny. He's like, you got to play the drums, man. You got to play, man, cats ain't playing drums, man. You got to have hands. And so this particular day, he's like, man, you got to play center of the drum, man. Snare wires off, man. That the Papa Joe taught me, and I was just like,
what? Yes.
I was like handshake.
Dude, that's crazy.
He's like, Papa gave it to me. That's how I'm giving it to you. And I'm like, and
Preach.
the whole and now.
Let it be so.
It is so. Amen.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Let's shift gears a little bit. The next track we're gonna do is called Shake and Blake. Christian McBride and his big band. What's the difference with approach? A lot of this stuff you're talking about or you've been talking about is combo approach, kind of smaller group. but you're also running your own big band, and you're a band leader and all that stuff. So how does the approach change in that kind of scenario?
So I'll give you a very, very quick story because I know we're on a time clock. I was at this session, actually, on this tune. We're recording at what is now Power Station Studios, Studio A in New York. And we got to one of the fills, and the fill came up in the tune, and I must have did something like, something sloppy and sloppy and syncopated. and McBride, he said, "Hey, stop. You." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Man, you got 17 miles to feed. Give us meat and potatoes." All right, 1, 2. and so what I've written about this, what I've done whole, lectures about this. What he basically schooled me on in front of everybody was, bro, you got 17 people here. We don't need all that hip, whatever. We need something right in the pocket.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, what's the difference between big band and small group? Small group, you have room for expression. It's 3 to 4, maybe 5 of you, or maybe 6. And it's just a small group. So if you try something, you've got less risk. When you've got 17 people, you've got, I'm here and there's, 12 feet between me and someone else, and then a 10-foot piano between me and whomever. So you need to keep things concise. The other thing I'll say, and I actually shared this with one of my students at Juilliard in the hallway, he was struggling in big band, and he was like, "Man, I don't know what to do. The director's telling me this and this one's telling me that." I said, first of all, in big band, you are the director. That person who's up there, they're there for decoration. They're just waving their hands. They look cute. But you are the director. The big band is the driver. The drummer is the driver of the big band. And until we get into that mindset and we own that place, and we own it, but not with ego, not with arrogance, but with humility. You take that power with humility, but it is your band, and you make sure you give them what they need. So that, to me, is the big difference between small group and big band.
Love it, man.
Yeah.
So this is Shake and Blake by Christian McBride.
Yeah, and I want to just preface, this is the first time I've played this track since I'm not playing with Christian, and I don't have the chart here. And we stripped the drums from the original recording, and shout out, is a Grammy-winning recording, Christian's first Grammy. So yeah, y'all pray for me.
Good luck. I bet that brings you back.
Oh man,
It's been a minute.
It's so funny, man. When I'm listening to McBride solo, I just he and I used to have all these like inner things we would just say to each other, and so I could just imagine him, like, especially when he's playing all that stuff up high, just like looking at me smiling, and I say something like, neck bones, grease, so yeah.
That's awesome, man. There's a few questions that have come in that we got a few minutes left.
Sure.
And I think these are really good ones to address because it's perfect for the topic.
Nice.
Even some stuff based on what you just played.
Okay.
The first one is on sight reading, and I know you just did this without a chart. And this is from Aiden Simon asking, do you have any tips for sight reading in a big band setting, and do you have any tips for playing shots with the band?
Shots. I love that new terminology. First thing I will say is with the sight reading, man, I'm not the greatest sight reader. I'll tell you. And one of the reasons is because I grew up playing in church, in the Pentecostal church, where you had to do everything by ear.
Yeah.
And so even sometimes when I'm reading, sight reading something, my ears, they're trying to get ahead of me, and I don't just look at the page. So one of the first pieces of advice I would give, look at the page. Like, pay attention to simple things. And I'm not saying this to be a jerk. Pay attention to things like repeats, DS, codas, and just the roadmap. Like if I have to sight read something and they're passing it out, they get the chart to me first. I start looking at the patterns. Like what are the repetitive things? Okay, A through F is 3 repeated sections. Okay, good, great. No hits. All right, so I'll need to pay attention to that. Okay, there's a big shout chorus here, and I start looking and kind of doing a crash course in what are the rhythms that I recognize? And if it's something kind of difficult that looks written, I start trying to like sound it out. I try to like sing it out, and stuff. So I would say key to sight reading is get your eyes on the page. Look for things that you've seen before. Oftentimes what happens with sight reading, our anxiety gets involved and our nerves get involved, and then we just throw out caution and we throw out logic. Particularly if you're playing in jazz big band, most of what's on that chart you've seen before. So anyway, those are some key things. And just making sure that you like relax. I think that's a big thing, is if you're not relaxed, nothing will come out great. And the other piece I'll just say, if you make the band feel good and you're swinging hard, they won't really care if you miss the hits, right? So there's that. In terms of how to catch the shots, or what I like to call the hits, you got to have some vocabulary. A couple feels that I love to go to rely on. 1, 2, Another one. Another one if it's a slower tempo. So if you have your 3 to 4 or 5, fills that you can go to, now you've got your language. Then the next part of it is learning how to see those hits. If you got some hits on and a 4, and a 2, or whatever, you have your language that you use to set stuff up. And then ultimately you have to listen. Yeah. One of the things I'll just say and be done with it, don't spend more time trying to make a setup for a feel, for a hit, feel better than making the time feel good. Because what happens is drummers now approach the chart and they're so hyped up about the hits and not about the other 100 measures where we're just playing. So I would say, yes, the hits are important, but not more important than just... I promise you do that, they won't care. Matter of fact, they won't want you to catch the hits. So that and then confidence, plays a big part. Just the more you do it, man, you just get more confident, and then people will trust you, because that's the big thing with big bands. You have to exude confidence. You have to exude the ability of saying, I am here for a reason, and I'm going to embody that. Otherwise, the band will start trying to lift the weight that you should be lifting, and it'll be imbalanced.
Even going back to your point earlier about listening to records and internalizing it, finding those groups or those records where you can pull vocabulary from and just pull it from this context, learn it, and then bring it into a new one if it fits.
I'll give, just real quick, Count Basie Live at the Sands. That was one of my first big band records. And there's nothing that I play now that still isn't connected. Like, something that I just played is connected to that. Sunny Pain, all day long. So yeah.
Love it. Let's see here. Oh, this is a good one from P-Dub. Is turning over your traditional grip hand to play the cymbals and drums a valid technique? Not switching to match, but just flipping the traditional hand over. And I think that's something we commonly see.
Is he talking about this?
Yeah, I think you're jumping between. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm jumping based on what I'm trying to accomplish. So like if I'm playing more of like a bop thing, you won't see me change. But if I'm like going from, I want like this sound versus this sound. So yeah, that's just something that I'm doing because I started out playing match grip. I've been playing drums since I was 2 years old. So I basically play match grip at basically my son's age. My son will be 2 in a couple days. But yeah, so I played match grip from that age. I did not get introduced to traditional grip till I was about 16.
Oh, wow.
And so even to this day, now I'm comfortable with it now. Like it for 16 to like 22, 23, it still would hurt sometimes. It just would feel weird. Now it doesn't feel weird, but sometimes if I need to dig in or if I need to really like anchor something, my first go-to is to go to what I've done my whole life. So that's not something I recommend or say people need to do. It's just my own comfort.
Yeah. And just for context too, like what did you grow up playing? You said you learned jazz kind of later on, but where did you come from?
Oh man, so from Jacksonville, Florida, I grew up at Still and Blue Church of God, and then eventually Sanctuary of Praise, Church of God, Sanctuary of Praise. But yeah, this is what I grew up doing. Like an old hymn. So yeah. But listen, that's I tell people I grew up in pre-Pro Tools gospel. This stuff they doing now.
Another level.
Oh, they running click tracks and stuff like that. I grew up when we were playing gospel music. It was a B3 Hammond organ, me, and a piano, pianist across the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Then we got a bass player and a lead guitar player. So by the time I stopped playing in church, which was about 18 years old, we were using acoustic instruments. Now I go in churches like a full Broadway production.
Yeah.
Cats are running in-ears and, I was just watching this guy the other day on the organ and he was, had the microphone calling cues and stuff. It's incredible what they're doing now, but I grew up with more acoustic Pentecostal gospel music.
Yeah, I think that's just a cool example of anyone out there who maybe thinks it's too late to learn how to play jazz. Like, you don't have to be born into this kind of music and have it be a part of your upbringing. Like, you can come into it years down the road, even if you've been playing for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I tell people, man, when I got to Juilliard, because I was fortunate to be part of Juilliard's inaugural jazz program in 2001. It was me and one other drummer, Carmen and Tori. So when I got to New York, I was in a class full of what I call jazz babies.
Yeah.
A lot of my class had known Wynton before. They come from big metropolitan cities where a lot of jazz musicians had been there. So they knew records, like I always say, we all had our Case Logic CD folders, right? And so they'd all be like, well, what you got in yours? Well, I'm like, what you got? And mine had, like 100, 150. They had, a bunch of them. But what I tell you, I tell people it's not about where you start, it's how you finish. So when I started, they had more records than me. They had gigs. By the time we all left together, I was doing what they were doing, which is also important about putting yourself around people who are better than you. So I get questions from musicians on Instagram every day, and they're like, oh, I'm 25 or I'm 45 or, excuse me, I'm this age. And I'm like, are you going to spend more time telling me why you shouldn't be doing this? Or why don't you spend the time with my attention telling me what you need help with so you can do it? So I think if we just change our philosophy, same thing. I started writing seriously about 4 or 5 years ago, and now I have several published books. And my writing was terrible. I had writing coaches telling me it was terrible, but I wrote every day. And now you got one of my books sitting on your desk.
Amazing.
So I say that to say it's all about what are you going to put your energy towards? What could keep you from it, or what can help you get better at it, and thus, being able to be successful. So it's all about where you want to place your focus.
Love that, man. I think that's a whole lesson in itself right there.
It's also about acceptance too, accepting where you are.
Yeah. I just appreciate, you're playing, crazy gigs, you're teaching at the highest level, and you're still willing to come on here and teach the fundamentals and the stuff that really matters and make this kind of music accessible to people who maybe think it's a little bit too far out of reach. So thank you so much.
It's very important to me, man. So
love it. Well, we're going to close with Brother Mister from the Christian McBride Big Band. This is a tribute to James Brown.
Yeah, James Brown is his hero. Anybody that knows Christian McBride or follows him knows James Brown is his everything. And so James Brown had a big thing of, he would say, brother Mr. Brandon.
I love it.
So McBride wrote a tune called Brother Mister.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us.
Everybody.
Thank you, Ulysses, for hanging out here.
Pleasure.
And this is Brother Mister. See you all later.